It's good to have you for another study in the book of Proverbs. We're going to be in Proverbs chapter 20 today. You know, most Proverbs are about the success of the individual. I mean, certainly there are passages about the throne, about government, and there are passages about society. But the most of the Proverbs are about how to improve the individual. It's amazing today that so many seem to focus on change in changing the way the society is. Change government, change our laws, change social ideas. Make all these big changes and then you will benefit the individual. But what the Bible comes to us with is if you change the individual, then the society will improve. Then the government will improve. I don't care who's sitting in the White House. I care who's sitting in your house. You see, the Bible approaches us as individuals, and we see this really coming out in the book of Proverbs. So let's begin chapter 20, and let's look at verse 1. Wine is a mocker. Strong drink is a brawler, and whoever is intoxicated by it is not wise. I suppose there are thousands, perhaps even millions of people in Alcoholics Anonymous, in AA, who will testify to the truth of this passage. There is danger here, danger in alcohol. The big delusion is that you can drink and stay in control, but it will steal your mind. We're not saying that these people are evil, are wicked. We're not saying they're not nice people, are not friendly people, are not kind and sweet. We're just saying it's not wise. It's not a good idea. And he says strong drink is a brawler. Reminds me of a friend of mine. He said he stopped drinking when he was in the Navy. He said he'd gone out to a bar one night and he's not that big of a guy, but he got a lot bigger when he started to drink. And he said at the end of the night, he found himself knocked out without any money. Somebody had just beat the living tar out of him. I guess he was there with other people who had thought that they were pretty strong too, and I guess they were bigger than him. Strong drink is a brawler. It's going to give you trouble, is what he's saying. Here's a cautionary reminder about the dangers of alcohol. In verse 2, the terror of a king is like the growling of a lion. He who provokes him to anger forfeits his own life. Another reminder that the government has a bite. That the government doesn't roar without a bite to it. And we can go back to Romans, the 13th chapter for Christians. Here's the Christian testimony about the government. And I'm going to start in verse 3 of chapter 13. You can read the entire chapter sometime if you like. But here's just a reminder of what Solomon said here in chapter 13. He says, "For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil." Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For it is a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid. For it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. One of the major jobs of government is to punish the evildoer, to punish the wicked. He says it doesn't carry the sword in vain. Let me tell you, you don't use a sword to put butter on your bread. A sword is not a knife. A sword is a capital punishment implement. It'll bring death to you. And he's warning about this. Now, this is something that's continually brought up. In chapter 19, last chapter, verse 12, it says, "The king's wrath is like a roaring lion, but his favor is like the dew of the grass." You better pay attention to government. It's not always a good idea. It's not always wise to provoke the government. Verse 3, "Keeping away from strife is an honor for a man, but any fool will quarrel. It doesn't take a lot of intelligence to argue. There are a lot of folks that just want to argue. They love to argue. And Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those who have learned that it's not always a good idea to argue. In Romans, the 12th chapter, verse 18, if possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. Don't enjoy arguing. Don't enjoy the quarrel. Any fool can quarrel, he says here. Any fool can argue. Verse 4. The sluggard does not plow after the autumn, so he begs during the harvest and has nothing. Again, we come back to this theme that he's talked about quite a bit, the lazy person, the sluggard, the slug. He does not go out and work. He does not plow after the autumn. Here is somebody without ambition and without discipline. And he is going to be miserable because of those things. It leads to ministry. Now, all honorable work, all honest work, I should say, is honorable to God. And the only thing that's criticized here is the guy who refuses to work. Now, verse 5, a plan in the heart of a man is like deep waters, but a man of understanding draws it out. Now, I thought about a couple of things with this passage here. Verse 5. Something we've all got to learn is to give advice to ourselves. To have a little talk with ourselves every once in a while. The problem we have in that, though, is that we lie. Most of the problems we get into in our life is we lied to ourselves about something. I had a class last summer on the lies we tell ourselves. Have the courage to tell yourself the truth. Stop lying to yourself. Because if you do lie to yourself, it is going to end up in guilt, in pain, in shame. But on the other hand, you can have a little talk with yourself that can lead you back to God. Ray Stevens had a song some years ago. He says, lately I've noticed all my friends avoided me, and the girl who loved me gone and said goodbye. My whole world has fallen apart and caving in on me, and I guess deep down I know the reason why. And I guess it's just about time to have a little talk with myself. Verse 27, just to jump there, he says, the spirit of man is the lamp of the Lord, searching all the innermost parts of his being. And so there's things inside of us. God can pull these up from the deep and help us. A plan in the heart of a man is like deep water, but a man of understanding draws it out. You see, back in verse 4 is a lazy guy. You can have all the plans you want to have, all these great ideas, but unless you pull them out and put them into action, it's not going to help you at all. So a plan in the heart of a man is like deep water, but a man of understanding, he draws those out and he builds on those things. Verse 6. Many a man proclaims his own loyalty, but who can find a trustworthy man? Everybody's honest. Just ask them, and they'll tell you that. That's what he's saying. Everybody goes around saying, I'm an honest person. I'm fine. I'm good. But they're not. Verse 7, a righteous man who walks in his integrity, how blessed are his sons after him. A righteous person is a blessing to his children, a blessing to his family, a blessing to his community. But God hates just honesty. He hates cheating. He hates thieves. And that's what he's saying here. A righteous man who walks in integrity, how blessed are his sons after him. Verse 8, a king who sits on the throne of justice disperses all evil with his eyes. A king who sits on his throne. Again, we come back to that previous verse in verse 2. The king, he can make a difference with just the look of his eyes. Just that glance should keep people in line. Chapter 13 of Romans, where it talked about that the government is a government of wrath, but he also reminds Christians to not just do good because you're afraid of the government, but because of a good conscience. And so we need to follow the government because it is ordained by God. Now, back in verse 2, he said pretty much the same thing, but also if we jump forward to verse 26, a wise king winnows the wicked and drives the threshing wheel over them. So a wise king gets rid of evil people. That's the job of government, is to protect us from evil. Verse 9. Who can say, I have cleansed my heart, I'm pure from my sin? Well, the answer is no one. We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, Romans 3:23. We all need the forgiveness of God that can only come through mercy. Justice would put the wrath of God deeply on us. And talking about an Eastern monarch, and God is like that Eastern monarch. The wrath of God demands justice, and our only hope is mercy. Our only hope is for someone to step forward and pay the debt for us, and that's what Jesus has done. He's paid the price. Not only has he given us mercy, which is not getting what we deserve, he's given us grace, getting what we don't deserve. Verse 10, differing weights and differing measures, both of them are an abomination to the Lord. Again, we come back to a common theme in Proverbs, and that is about ethical business dealings. Cheating in business. If you jump down to verse 23, he says, differing weights are an abomination to the Lord, and a false scale is not good. To buy things with one weight and sell them under another weight, he says that's wrong, especially if you're being deceptive about it. And, it is so disappointing. Some of this happened to me today. I needed a service done, and I emailed a friend, asked how much it would cost to have it done, and she gave me an estimate. And then came the contract, and the contract price was 3 times more than what she had told me in her email. I mean, it's just discouraging. It's disappointing when you see these things happen. We think, oh, this doesn't happen today. Oh, yes, it happens all the time. We always have to be on our toes. It's discouraging. Verse 11, it is by his deeds that a lad distinguishes himself, if his conduct is pure and right. Well, how do you tell if someone's a good person? It's by what they do. In fact, we use our eyes and we use our ears. We'll continue here in verse 12. The hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord has made them both. How does a young lad distinguish himself? By what he does. But we cannot judge his motives, and we cannot judge his heart. Only God does. And so we have to see at what he does, not what he says or what he wants to do, but what he does. Verse 13, do not love sleep, or you will become poor. Open your eyes, and you will be satisfied with food. Again, we get back to the sluggard, the lazy guy who's too busy sleeping. He says, open your eyes, and you'll find some food. If you keep your eyes closed, you're sleeping all the time, you're not going to get anywhere. Verse 14, bad, says the buyer. But when he goes his way, then he boasts. In the Eastern cultures, they really love the haggle. In China, they'll haggle over everything. I mean, you can go into a restaurant and you can haggle over the price of what they've charged you. It is crazy when we think of it. And you start, how much you give it, and you tell them, oh, that's bad, not enough money. And then they give you a price. Oh, no, that's too much money. And you go back and forth and back and forth. And it's just a crazy thing. I remember I picked up a hat, and the guy, how much you want? How much what? I didn't want the hat. I said, I'm just looking at it. Well, how much? I don't want it. And I picked up some cards. How much? And he just kept bothering me. And I finally said, okay, 5 kwai. Now, there's 8 kwai to $1 back then, so we're not talking about very much money. For a nice baseball cap and some postcards. And I thought I'd just leave him alone. Oh, that's not enough. That's too much. And not enough. I need more money. And I said, okay. Well, then I started to walk off. He said, okay, 5 kwai. And I was embarrassed then. I thought, oh my goodness, I didn't even want these things. I was just trying to. But that's what he's talking about here. It's just the culture that Solomon lived in. Bad, says the buyer, but when he goes away, then he boasts, I got a good deal. Verse 15, there is gold and abundance of jewels, but the lips of knowledge are a more precious thing. You know, sometimes we think there's just so much gold and silver and jewels in the world. So it's abundance. There is so much gold and silver and jewels. Just think about it. Almost everyone you know has some kind of gold or silver. We wear it as wedding rings. It is abundant. But what he says is really hard to find is a guy who speaks with knowledge. A guy who, when he opens up his mouth, you hear knowledge. It's a rare thing, he says, to speak with knowledge. Take his garment when he becomes surety for a stranger, and for foreigners, hold him in pledge. Somebody you don't know, and he wants to borrow something. Well, you better get a deposit. You better get some kind of collateral, he says. Just take this as a warning. It is an amazing thing. We were watching the People's Court today, and one of the cases in it was somebody who allowed somebody else to use their driver's license. And sometimes I've seen where they've used somebody else has used their driver's license and the credit card, and then they're shocked if this person abuses that privilege. This is what he's addressing here. Don't let a stranger or a foreigner borrow something without taking a pledge. And the thing he says more often than not, just don't even be surety at all. Don't even get involved in these things. Verse 17. Bread obtained by falsehood is sweet to a man, but afterward his mouth will be filled with gravel. We go back up to these previous verses and the haggling and the truth in business. Sometimes you get a good deal, but the result of the good deal is you might be filled with guilt. And that's what he's saying. The results are not always that great. Verse 18, prepare plans by consultation and make war by wise guidance. It's important to get good counsel. And a wise person will get a multiplicity of wise people to advise him. Decisions made by a group, the give and take of discussion, are usually so much better than the decision of just one person. I think, again, here's the blessing and the wisdom of an eldership that God has given the church. It's not just one person. It's a multiplicity of three people coming in the give and take, and the desire to come away from that meeting with one voice. It's a challenge, but that's what's wise here. And so prepare plans by consultation, make war by wise guidance. And he's going to say this again, and he has said it before. Back in chapter 11, verse 14, he said, where there is no guidance, the people fall. But in abundance of counselors, there is victory. In chapter 15, verse 12, a scoffer does not love one who reproves him. He will not go to the wise. He doesn't look for any kind of help at all. That went with this really well, but I was looking for verse 22, which says, without consultation, plans are frustrated, but with many counselors, they succeed. And then if you jump forward to chapter 24, verse 6, a very similar thing is said, for by wise guidance you will wage war, and in abundance of counselors there is victory. So the need for abundance of counselors, looking for a lot of wise advice is a good decision. Verse 19, he who goes about as a slanderer reveals secrets, therefore do not associate with a gossip. A gossip tells stories about other people. He reveals secrets of other people. And if you are a friend of a gossip, guess who he's going to gossip about? He's going to gossip about you. And so Solomon says, stay away from a gossip. Stay away from a slanderer. Don't be friends with these people because they will cause you trouble. Verse 20, he who curses his father or his mother, his lamp will go out in time of darkness. In the Ten Commandments, the first four commandments deal with God, how to love God. And the last 6 commandments are how to love people. And the first of the commandments on how to love people, number 5, is honor your father and your mother. And it's so important, and that's what he's talking about here. And I'm shocked at how often this is brought up by Solomon. It is a strong theme here. Back last chapter 19, verse 26, he who assaults his father and drives his mother away is a shameful and disgraceful son. I mean, we could have gone back to chapter 10, verse 1. But a foolish son is a grief to his mother. Chapter 15, verse 20. A wise son makes a father glad, but a foolish son despises his mother. In chapter 17, and this will come up in a moment, a servant who acts wisely will rule over a son who acts shamefully and will share in the inheritance among brothers. The father is going to leave the inheritance with an employee before he leaves it to this shameful son. And verse 25 of chapter 17. A foolish son is a grief to his father and bitterness to her who bore him. In chapter 6 of Ephesians, we should go there for just a moment. Ephesians chapter 6. There is some insight. I don't want to bring this out because there was a question brought out to me last week. Here it is in chapter 6, beginning in verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. We see 2 extremes here. We see the one extreme is the father who provokes his children. He has harsh rules. He's very strict. He is unfair, and he discourages and disheartens his children. He provokes them to anger. The other extreme is the son or the daughter who despises his parents. And this is what he's talking about. You can be a bad parent and you can be a bad child. But Solomon pounds over and over on this idea of being an ungrateful child. Verse 20, he who curses his father or his mother, his lamp will go out in time of darkness. Verse 21, an inheritance gained hurriedly at the beginning will not be blessed in the end. In fact, this foolish son, his inheritance will be skipped altogether, it says in the previous chapter. But, inheritance gained hurriedly. Reminds you of the prodigal son. He got his inheritance early, and he wasn't wise enough to know how to spend it, and he went and squandered everything. He says he'll not be blessed at the end. He never learned really what to do with it. Verse 22, do not say, I will repay evil. Wait for the Lord, and he will save you. Again, go back to Romans, the 12th chapter. I don't want to go too long here. Romans 12, he says, never take your own vengeance, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I'll repay, says the Lord. But, might as well read the rest of it. But if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him a drink, for in so doing you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. We are not God's policemen. We are not God's justice system. We are to let God take care of things himself. Verse 24. Verse 23 we already looked at about unfair business practices. Verse 24, man's steps are ordained by the Lord. How then can man understand his ways? Do you know what you're going to be doing next year? If I asked you that last year, would you know that all the stuff going on now? I mean, if you read that little meme that's supposed to be funny, a lot of people right now, their 5-year plan is not coming true. Do you know what's going to happen next year? No, because it is in the providence of God. It is in the hands of God. Like the saying goes, I don't know what the future holds, but I know who holds the future. And that's what Solomon is saying. 25, it is a trap for a man to say rashly, it is holy, and after the vows to make inquiry. Fools rush in, is what he says. They make these rash promises. In the New Testament, we're encouraged not to make a vow at all. But if we do make the vow, we better take plenty of time to figure it out. The only vow I know that we all make pretty consistently is the vow of marriage. And that is one that is truly one that we should be serious about and not rush in. Verse 26, a wise king winnows the wicked and drives the threshing wheel over them. We looked at that. Verse 27, the spirit of a man is the lamp of the Lord, searching all the innermost parts of his being, and we looked at that. Verse 28, loyalty and truth preserve the king, and he upholds his throne by righteousness. Again, the importance of honest government. Verse 29, the glory of young men is their strength, and the honor of old men is their gray hair. Young men don't claim to be wise. They claim to be strong. But old men, it's an honor for them if they are wise. The older I get, the better I used to be. I get weaker every day, it seems like. We had some furniture being moved the other day. 14 years ago, we moved into this house. I carried it upstairs. Carrying it downstairs, we called Hayden and Ryan over. And as I was helping lift it, I said to Hayden, it's amazing how much heavier this furniture has gotten over the years. I think that's what Solomon is saying here. Young men, they'll find glory in their strength, but the honor of old men is in their gray hair, their wisdom. Verse 30, stripes that wound scour away evil, and strokes reach the innermost parts. Man, it is rough to go to the school of hard knocks. The school colors are black and blue. The school motto is, ouch. I mean, you have to learn it the hard way. And he says stripes and the beatings. At the end of chapter 19, he almost said the same thing. He says, judgments are prepared for scoffers and blows for the back of fools. Correction is a harsh teacher. He says the strokes reach the innermost parts. I mean, they go down deep. They are going to teach you a lesson you probably will not forget. Well, that's chapter 20. You know, why does Solomon divide up Proverbs like this? You would think that he would do this in a more topical manner. I mean, we like topical ways of thinking, and the Jews definitely like topical ways of thinking. You know, the Bible was written not chronologically. It is organized in topics. So why didn't Solomon put all the passages about the tongue together, all the ones about government together, all the ones about business together, all the ones about ethics together, all those things? Why didn't he put them together? Well, it seems like what he wants to do is just layer upon layer upon layer upon layer to say, here's this lesson. Now, I want to tell you another lesson, but don't forget this one. And he keeps getting louder, layer. He keeps beating the same drum over and over on some of these topics. I want you to look at something new, but I want you to remember what I've already taught you. And get different angles on these topics. But I think another thing, too, is it tells you that the intention originally was to look at each verse and stop and think about it and meditate on it and ask yourself, how am I making this part of my life? How can I include this in my life? How much wiser would I be if I listened to these things? Life makes more sense with wisdom. Some struggle through life without any insight. They seem to be clueless. And what a loving Father we have who wrote these things down and said, you want to have a good life? You want to be successful? Here are some principles to live by. Thanks for joining me. Join me again next time. We'll be looking at chapter 21.